The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, and photography. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they had been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I am your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr. On today's program, we'll discuss the work of Chester Higgins Jr., the famed photographer and author of the new book, Feeling the Spirit, which is a collection of the many, many works that he's done over the many, many years about African Americans in the diaspora. And Chester, glad to have you with us on African American Legends.
Thank you.
And what I know everyone wants to know is, how did you get into this idea of photography and exploring the characteristics and the experiences of the black family, the black woman, the blacks in the diaspora?
You know, for two reasons. Growing up in Alabama, I'm from a little country town, Alabama, and I went to school at Tuskegee. And during the civil rights period, I was really struck by the fact that every time I look at the media, the only times I see pictures of my people were either when they were shown in a pathological manner, people on the extremes of society, or when they were being arrested or suspected felon. And we are humans, so yes, we have people like that, so does everyone else. But what it did not show was the rest of the body, the other dimensions of the African American community. It did not show my mother and her friends who were school teachers, or the principal, or the minister, or the people who were in the community trying to make it work, and the kids who were in the community trying to grow into themselves in very responsible ways. And I realized that those images would never get in the paper unless I and other people like me went out and made those images and then brought them to the media and tried to sell those images as an additional way of looking at our community. I think that it's very important that when you see something that should be changed, you have an option. You can either play victim and talk about what is not happening, or you can get involved in trying to push those doors down yourself. Make sure that something in your life is worthwhile, because the second reason was something my great uncle said to me. He said to me at one point, he says, you know, it's very important that you make a statement in life, or you have some effect in life, positive effect in life, or you can very well die undeclared. So I think the challenge for all of us is to how do we declare ourselves and make our time here while we're living worth something? How do we contribute to the public good? The public good not only for people who are you immediately connected to, but also to your neighbors as well. So for me, photography has been a challenge and it's been a mission. It's been a mission to make those images of my people that outsiders or non-belongers have been unable to see, that maybe only belongers can see. And then it's been a challenge to try to get those images into the mainstream press so that not only my people can see them, but my neighbors, our neighbors can see them. We can all benefit from it.
Well, Chester Higgins Jr. is a byline we see frequently under photographs in the New York Times. One thing that I'm always interested in, because I follow your work very closely and sometimes when involved in some of your work, how do you or the editor make the decision as to what you shoot? Do you just walk around the city and go to important things and shoot them? Or do you have a plan, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination. I mean, there are things that are set that are going on into the city. I mean, New York is a great place to be because, you know, you have so many layers of society that unfolds every day. So there are so many things that are happening that are going on that we are assigned from day to day. But then there are also things, there's an openness to coming up with your ideas and things that you want to show that you think that that we're not covering because it's a part of a story or it's breaking news, but it's things that should be looked at. I'll give you an example. Recently I went to look at we call this floating in the city looking for day pictures. And recently I made a picture of a group of preschoolers who had come to look at New York City landmarks, and they were up in Harlem in front of the Schomburg Center, a very important place. I want people to know about that. It's important that these kids are there. So that sort of picture is a picture that I make and winds up in the paper. Or
but
recently,
then somebody makes a decision in the paper to run it or not run it.
Well, that's true. So and that is competition. I'm up against, no matter what I feel and think, I'm still up against what is visually compelling. So within that structure, that is the ball field. It has to be visually compelling so that the editors will see, wow, this packaged image is worth putting in the paper. The content comes along with the packaging. So I have to be, one, concerned about the content, but also has to be concerned about being visually competitive so that my image stands up with the other images that other photographers have produced that day, so that it comes out of that lottery of images to land into the paper. And that's the daily challenge. The daily challenge, the weekly challenge. It's been a challenge now for 20 years at the Times, and it's a challenge that I relish.
Well, you certainly are well known as a photographer and have done a tremendous amount to expand and extend the way in which African Americans are portrayed, particularly in the daily press. But there are other African American photographers who preceded you who also made a statement, James Van Der Zee, Gordon Parks. Specifically.
Absolutely.
How did they influence your work?
Well, it's on their shoulders that I stand. I mean, the fact that those guys existed when I was looking around to find my meaning, my place in the world of photography was quite heartening. Mr. Van Der Zee, a grand old man who I had photographed for the Times and spent many days talking to and enjoying his stories of an older date, only reinforced for me my mission of documenting people of African descent worldwide. Gordon Parks has been very important because here you have Gordon as a Renaissance man who has really done everything: the magazine, the books, film,
sculpture,
painting, everything. So that, and I talk about in my introduction in this book, Feeling the Spirit, of mentors, and Gordon Parks is one of them, and how Gordon Parks taught me to understand and appreciate the breadth of creativity, that it doesn't just have to be one thing. But also Gordon Parks taught me that, that if I'm serious about what I want to do, then it's incumbent to make sure that every image that I produce, that it becomes an image that's better than the last one. And that to always, and to hold fast to the mission of trying to make sure that I use my images to help define and show that broader perspective of African life, African American life, that non-belongers find hard to see. So they've been very important people in my life.
Well, what about some of the so-called celebrities, the history makers, the Malcolms and the Martins and the David Dinkins and the Jesse Jacksons and the Al Sharptons and the Hazel Dukes and so on? How do you approach shooting them?
Well, I feel, first of all, that it's important to cover them, that they get access to the media, and that they have, and to look at them, and I feel that I hope that I get a chance to look at them and bring some new dimension of understanding to them that may have not been seen in other pictures. My first job as a photographer in 1970 was with Look magazine, and it was to cover Jesse Jackson. I spent a week running around the country with Jesse. When Jesse ran for president, I had a great time covering him for the Times, and also David Dinkins, Al Sharpton. And I think that, if you look at coverage of the Times during the period when Dave Dinkins was running, you had a very aggressive, sympathetic image that was coming out of the campaign through my photographs in the Times. But if you look at the text that the writers were writing at that time, it looked like cognitive dissonance, actually.
The beleaguered mayor. Yeah.
Yes, the beleaguered candidate, actually, and then became the beleaguered mayor. But, I can't worry about, everybody sees, the paper's made up of human beings, and all humans have their own agendas and they see things differently. My job is to see it how I see it, and hopefully that since I know how everybody else sees it, if I can bring something different to that mix, then I think that's my purpose for being there, and I enjoy that.
Well, you also have been very aggressive about photographing the black woman.
Oh, absolutely.
You have a book on it and so on.
Right.
Well, how does that play out? Is there anything in your experience that makes you really want to explore the black woman more than most male photographers do?
Well, I think, for me, and I think for a lot of people, but I can only speak for myself, the black woman has been a very important presence in my life, starting off with my mother and my great aunts and women who were my teachers or my professors or my friends and lovers, very important people. so that you know, it's something I think when you look at it from so many different perspectives, part of looking at it is an acknowledgement, the other part of it is respect and acceptance, and the other part of it is paying homage. So when I did my first book, it was called Black Woman, which I thought was a correct protocol to go, to do a book on women first, and then I did one on men, then called Drums of Life, and then I did a book on the history of people of African descent in America in the last 100 years through photography called Some Time Ago. And now this book, Feeling the Spirit, and the cover to this book is a gorgeous black woman from Brazil that graces the pages, and I think that that's quite appropriate to have her looking out. And then in the fall, when I have my major retrospective exhibition at International Center of Photography, there will be yet another beautiful black woman on the cover of that from the book, and it's an Islamic woman. So you have this white veil and her globe-like eyes piercing out in between.
And you have traveled all over the world, particularly all over the African diaspora.
From Europe to South Africa, and from Canada to Argentina, where we find ourselves.
And using that experience of the diaspora, you've used that as the basis of developing Feeling the Spirit.
Right. Well, the important thing about Feeling the Spirit I wanted to show is that here, and the subtitle is called Searching the World for the People of Africa. I wanted to show several things. First of all is that we African people make up a world community, that we are on every continent in the world. Sometimes we're there voluntarily, some of us got there involuntarily, but we're there. And you can find us, and this book looks at what I call the transatlantic communities of the African diaspora, because you can find people of African descent on one side of the Atlantic Ocean from England down to South Africa, on this side of the Atlantic Ocean from Canada down to Argentina. And I wanted to let people see that the world of African Americans, of African people, is much bigger than our little neighborhood or our community or our state. We are part of a world community. And also to show us that we are connected to each other. And that in different worlds, different places, we have adapted to different things. In some places, we've adapted to a different language. A lot of us speak Portuguese, French, Dutch, Spanish, as well as English, as well as Ga, Twi, Bambara, Swahili. And also we have adapted to climates. Some of us are people who live in the high mountains that are 5,000 and 15,000 feet high. Some of us live in the deserts. Some of us live in the plains and the flats. And all of that goes to make up to how diverse we are as a people. And I think our diversity is what makes us great, any people great. But in that diversity, we're still much alike. We still have the same day-to-day problems. We have the same
Now, what
ambitions.
are those day-to-day problems due to?
Well, I think that, you know, problems, we all talk about problems and none of us wish we had any. But, you know, it's not the problems that are important in life, it's how we solve the problems. Because solving the problems is what makes character, what makes you feel self-esteem, because you know that you can solve problems. It's when problems get so big that you find you don't have the capacity to solve them, that's when your self-esteem starts falling. But as you rise to each challenge and find a way to solve each problem, that makes you feel more confident in yourself. And you can't find better confidence than having a history of solving problems.
Well, I was really moving more directly toward the role of race, the role of color, because the one thing it does set African people aside from other people is their color,
Right.
as well as their heritage and their culture. And you caught my attention when you said they have the same problems.
Right. Our
Now,
problem, the problems that we may experience in a majority culture that is non-white, or even in a majority culture on
That
the
is
continent
controlled by
that
whites.
is controlled by whites when all blacks are around us, is because we are not the one who are in the overall power position. That has not always been the case with African people, but in more cases now than we are proud of, it is. But there again, there is a challenge that we have to solve and that we have to overcome. You know, Booker T had a saying.
Booker T. Washington.
Booker T. Washington had a saying. It's not a sin for a man to fall into a ditch. It's a sin for him to stay there. And that if you conceive yourself as someone whose lot is to remain in a ditch and never think of how to get out of that ditch and to pull other people out with you, then you're not much help to yourself or them. But when you raise your sight above and says, look, I am too big for this ditch. I deserve more than this ditch. Let me then use my mind, since nobody else is going to free us but ourselves. Let me use my mind, put it to the service of myself and to others to free us, to unstick our boats from the bottom and rise. That is within our creative power if we decide to challenge ourselves to that.
Now, how does that come through in some of the portraits? As you said, you've taken portraits from Argentina to Canada, from Norway to South Africa. How does that show? Is any common theme in any of those
In my pictures
photographs?
and from the book you see in Feeling the Spirit, one thing that you will see throughout my book is that you see positive images of people who are dealing each day in a confident way. You don't see negative images. I don't believe that negative images help anybody. When people believe, some people believe, to show images of hope is to show someone totally destroyed. I don't believe that. I believe it paralyzes people to show that. Instead, and I feel that I, as a photographer, I don't have to do that. Too many other people are doing that. Mostly non-belongers. It's happening. But as a photographer who feel that people need to be inspired, that people need to take stock of what works for us and take stock for what in our, there's a poverty of the spirit as well as a poverty of condition. And I think there's an opposite. There is a blessing of the spirit. There's a spirit that thrives in us. There's a spirit that we have to hold on to make ourselves better. And that's what I look for in my pictures. What are those images that I can help bring to bear, make icons of what's a part of our daily lives that become inspirational, that becomes charging, that allow each and every person who comes to these images to feel empowered by their own possibility and then to move forward with that.
Well, with that, do you do much with ritual? Because ritual, it means a lot in the lives of everyone, but particularly African people, ranging from the continent of Africa to the black church here,
Absolutely.
et cetera.
Absolutely.
So your pictures, I know, show a considerable amount of ritual.
Absolutely. Ritual is very important because ritual is a stabilizing, is in one hand, a stabilizing, concretizing, freeing experience. And I looked at ritual in terms of in terms of rites of passages in the book, and also spirituality. I looked at African spirituality, I looked at diasporan spirituality, and I've looked at to see how the continental evolution of spirituality has taken hold in the diaspora, how Christianity, how Hebrewism, all of these many ways in which we come together to unload our emotional duress and to try to find the confidence to live for tomorrow in the ritual that holds on to African ancient memories that have maybe been lost, and to reintroduce ourselves to them, and to use the rituals of religion. So many people, we live in a mostly Christian country. So many people forget that Christianity is born out of Hebrewism, which is born out of African religion called Egyptian religion. Well, African religion is best understood as a nature-based theology system. And I talk about that in that book because I think it's important that people understand that. So that the inventors of religion are African people, just like the cradle of humanity has come from Ethiopia, the earliest known bones of Lucy, 3.5 million years old, that the Ethiopians call her Dinkwanesh. And it's important, I think, for us to reconnect, to see how these things connect in a chain or in a link, one by one, so that we can find a way to realign ourselves. That I think so much of what people are discovering is that we suffer from a non-alignment of our individual selves and collective selves. And I hope that this books, in Feeling the Spirit, shows people what that looks like once it's realigned, so that people can find themselves in these different places. You'll go through this book and you'll see images of something that you sure could be happening around the street from you, and only when you look in the caption, you are surprised that, wow, this is in Ghana, or this is in Brazil, or this is in Trinidad, or this is in France, or this is in London, or this is in Vermont. It's all there. And I think it's a discovery, and I'm glad to be able to bring this discovery to people.
Well, what about just the basic physical beauty and structure of African people? As we travel the world, many people think that we are still from the continent, or if we see somebody from the continent, that's just like my uncle.
Right.
I know you do a lot of portraits.
Right.
Now, in this particular book, because this does cover a lot of your work, do you pay particular attention to portraits as well as the general ritual of the African experience?
Oh, absolutely. I love looking at portraits for a lot of reasons. But one thing I learned while living in Africa one summer was I came across the whole concept of bone structure. Continental Africans have a way of telling each other apart by looking at bone structure, which was something totally new to me. To one day I was sitting on the University of Ghana campus, and some of my friends were sitting with me, and a guy went across the campus, and they said, well, where did this Nigerian come from? Well, these guys are with me. I knew they didn't know this guy was Nigerian. I said, well, how did you know that? They said, well, it's bone structure and the way he moved. So that really taught me something. So I spent a couple years looking for that. So when I look at portraits now, I look at, in addition to how I look for the spirit and how the person expresses themselves, their total personality, I'm also looking at bone structures. In this country, you may notice that African Americans who mix with the Native Americans tend to have very high, distinct cheekbones. Or in some countries where you can see the mixture of African Americans with Asians, they tend to have a certain mellowing of the bones and a certain structure in the eye that's quite different. Highlanders in Ethiopia look totally different from people who live in the lowlands. The Bantu people look totally different, and the Bantu Bambara people on the west coast look totally different from the East Africans. You know, for years, we have been miseducated to believe that the Egyptians somehow were not African and that Egypt somehow floated into the Mediterranean and was not a part. And because people say, well, look at these statues. These statues are not the African people that we know who are in the Americas. True, they are not Bambara. They are not Bantu people. But have you looked at the hair and looked at the acriline bone structure of people in East Africa, especially Ethiopia? And you can see how the Egyptians, their paternity traces back to Ethiopia. But if you want to separate these out and don't understand these, then people can tell you anything.
What about celebrities? I know there are photographers who make an entire career of photographing celebrities. I know that's not something that you do generally, but to what extent do you look for sports celebrities in action or people in drama or music? To what extent do you do that?
I tend to do that more for the paper than for myself, because I feel that it's the common everyday person that I'm after, the people who don't get the attention. The celebrities are going to be taken care of. But there are special people who I do try to go and photograph. I tend to be attracted generally to people, what I call people of consciousness. People who have a life mission about their work and about themselves, and who take themselves as well as their craft seriously, but who sort of take themselves who see themselves in history, who see themselves in terms of a larger context of community. And those people I go photograph. I tend to photograph a lot of the artists, a lot of the painters. For years I was a student under Romar Bearden. And Bearden started me off on going to photograph different people that had done different things, like the president of Morehouse College, or some of the artists, or Jacob Lawrence, or Ralph Ellison, the writers. So there's a certain kind of people that I do like photographing that from time to time I do, other than what I generally do. But generally, I go for the no-name people. But there is a collection one day I have to print. In fact, on this book, Feeling the Spirit, I had another 100 pages of what I call in their footsteps, and there were those people, people like Nelson Mandela, who I photographed in Stockholm after he was released, because when he was being released, I was in Brazil shooting, and I was watching on TV, and I said, my God, I wish I was there. And I said, well, but if the spirit means for me to have a picture of Nelson Mandela, it'll come to me. And a month later, I was in Stockholm photographing him and Oliver Tambo. So, I make these efforts to do people that I think are of real conscious consequence that have effect on all of our lives for decades.
How do you envision this book being used in schools, in religious organizations, on coffee tables? How do you really see this book making an impact?
Well, I see it as bringing information to you that you didn't know before that can help educate you to our possibility. It's very important in schools, because now we're talking in schools about multiculturalism, we're talking about understanding the dimensions of African American, African history, and we live in a culture that's very visual. So it's one thing to encourage a child to go through a book of type, But it's something else when you can inspire them with an image, where they can relate to that image and see, wow, that person kind of looks like me, or I think I know something about that person. And you develop an emotional connection based upon the visual. And that visual has then done a couple things. It's already opened the person up to the possibility of wanting to learn this. It's made that knowledge attractive to go and do the work that's necessary to study the other parts. And you've also localized this image in this place, so you're teaching geography here as well as teaching current events in history. And you know, it's kind of like you can take the horse to the water trough, but you can't make him drink. And I hope that these pictures will help inspire everybody to want to drink. And especially in people tell me that on their coffee table, when people come to their homes, people get stuck in this book and they just start going through it hours and hours. And it's a great conversation piece of discovery. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. Look, this is here. That's here. How did they get there? How did this happen? And we're all a part of the same people, which I think then begins to help us get a more honest and total view of who we are and what our possibility is. And I think that is what breeds, that knowledge breeds self-esteem. And I think self-esteem is more important than ego and pride, because to me, pride and ego are the same thing, and it's 100% of nothing, like a hot air balloon. But knowledge that comes out of self-esteem that you can work with is important.
Also, understanding of one's heritage probably is the best thing that contributes to self-esteem. And you've done it very, very positively in this book, Feeling the Spirit, Searching the World for the People of Africa.
Thank you.
And Chester Higgins Jr., we're really very, very pleased that you have come to African American Legends to talk about this book. And
my pleasure.
I look forward to viewing this as I've viewed your many other books.
Great. You got to come to my exhibition, too.
Okay, we will.
Okay, great.